Yes, well, I see everybody should be seated. So, my name is Andrzej. Thank you for choosing my talk. I have a Twitter. You know what to do with Twitters. Who has a Twitter account in here? Raise your hands. Good. Please tweet. I have an email. I have a blog. I happen to work at eBay, but because of corporate policies, whatever I present, whatever I speak, my opinions are my own. It's not my company speaking. If you have been to Krakow to a Polish Java User Group meeting, to a GeeCON, to Software Craftsmanship meeting, to Cracow Hadoop User Group meetup, you might have met me somewhere. And I happened to work in some places before eBay, of course. And because JDD seems to be the place to announce new and cool conferences, like Scala announced yesterday, there will be a GeeCON, of course, next year, at the dates and location visible. So next May, come to Krakow, and next probably October, go to JDD again. One more disclaimer: if I complain too much, yes, I sometimes say I hate computers. There is a screen I can see if you tweet, but you don't. Please do. If you have any questions, well, here are some generic answers. If they don't match your question really well, just raise your hand. Somebody will give you a microphone, or I will try to listen and repeat the question and then try to answer it. Do it right away whenever a thought appears, because otherwise it might be lost and it might be really difficult to catch me later, because I don't scale that well. If you're sleepy, release more often. That's what you should do. And the basis of this talk is that software, to me, it's a very fun technical problem in most cases, but in even more cases, it seems to be more of a people problem. It's how people interact or how people make it difficult to one another, because of course they want to promote security or processes or organization structure, or prevent the power that they seem to have to leave them. So imagine a situation, in which we have this very famous quote. Who recognizes it? Where is it from? Yes, exactly, Agile Manifesto. I don't have any teddy bears or anything else to give you, so I can just... Sorry, don't blame me. But I can give you a thumbs up. They mentioned continuous delivery, and they did it in 2001. And still, continuous delivery seems to be a very 2011, 2012, 2013 thing. The problem with continuous delivery is that delivery, unlike TDD, is a very organization-specific thing. It really depends on your business. It depends if you're a software house. It depends if you're doing your own software. If you're like eBay, doing software that runs your business. If you're an email marketing company, then if the software is still all yours, then it's a different story compared to where you are when you are doing a white labeled product. So SaaSing your software to customers, another different story, and then you could be like a major travel and airline industry software provider, and there you get all kinds of things there. Thing with problems with delivery, of course you will have some. The way to approach them is make a list, order it by how important or how big the problems there are, and fix the first one. Because otherwise you might be fixing, something that was only a slight problem, but if you fix the biggest issue you have, you might reorder the list. So after you fix one, the big thing, redo the list and see if the order changed, because when you, for example, fix your database builds, it might also enable your, continuous integration to run fast, separation of environments, what have you. Whatever the story will be in your particular organization. And, imagine a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there is a system, or the system. And it has some developers, and developers, as you know, like to code. And somebody told me that if a presentation doesn't contain a cat, then it's not valid, so I had to. So developers, they push their code. They push their code, well, normally, they code, they test, they pair, they don't pair, they complain, they go for beers, they code again, and suddenly, well, the site breaks. And then the site breaks for, well, 2 days, actually, and it's during the hot season, think Black Monday, think whatever the hot period for your specific business is. Well, everybody is quite angry. Decision, of course, is all roll back. And, well, the problem becomes, well, where do we roll back to? Where are we actually now? Somebody who's really brave might do something like that. You might have a tag, you might have something, but I unfortunately have seen quite a few organizations that do not know which software runs in their production. Like, no, there is something. You can connect your workspace and use Eclipse to actually work on production and debug it while it's running, but you don't know which version it is. Yes, in 2013. Say again? Let's do it nicely. Well, what you can do is gather binaries. You can do, well, you can put your software, you can store it somewhere. You can, well, sign your software if you would like to know that it's really what's running, because of course it might be that you deploy your software properly, especially in, well, script languages like Ruby, like PHP. You might put the code out there and somebody, some brave developer might actually log into production and decides, well, could you please change that flag? Or you might get a call from a person very high in the company structure saying that I'm trying to do X with your software. Can you please remove the database limits for, let's say, daily transactions? It happens. The thing is, if you don't know who does what, then if something breaks, you don't know what happened. You don't know why it happens, and you can't actually repeat the problem to be able to investigate. You can have manual environments. You can have, well, static things which do things. And then if they are manually maintained, that doesn't really work. What you can do is do minus version. Of course, the poor man's version of that is doing tags. If you can do a semantic version, it's always better. And why do a version? Why not rely on a Git tag? Because versions just read nicer. It's much easier for me to remember not an MD5 but 1.13.78. It's still easier, it's quite okay. If your versions are naturally sortable using normal Linux sort or any other decent sort, then it's even better. It should be consistent within the app, so the app should report the same version in all the places. It's not such a big of a problem, but it's usually very helpful. And if you can do, well, question mark version, or have a URL call that will report what the application consists of, what the status is, that's usually quite awesome. It doesn't have to be available on the public internet. You can intercept that URL on Apache or somewhere and not let everybody else know. But usually it is not such a big deal. But it should be there and it should be consistent. So do make sure to know what is where. So when you actually when you do a rollback, you know where are you and where you want to go. What to do in case in a case when you have multiple Git repositories. That's, well, unfortunately Git submodules is not something I could recommend. I have not seen it work well for anybody yet. If you have a different opinion or different experience with Git submodules, well, I'd love to hear that. Git subtrees, to me, that's even more magic. Multiple repositories are okay, but you have to have an external versioning mechanism that actually applies versions consistently. You can also do one version for development. You can do one for releases. If you're an unhappy Subversion user, or you have a third party working with you, or, well, your ops are on the well, we are really afraid side, which is sometimes really okay because their priorities is to remove the risk. Then having one repo for development and then doing every release into a prod repository and then releasing to prod actually from this prod repository is okay. Just make sure that it's consistent. and that there is a way that everybody can follow easily. If you're looking for tools, well, on top of what everybody else or a quick Google search might return, I could recommend Glue. It's an open source thing that looks like this. You define your deployments. It might not fit your model, but if you're trying to build a custom deployment management dashboard for your company, try to give it a look. If you won't use it, at least it will give you some ideas of some of the things that you might want to consider for your software. But then, remember our sad site that actually broke down. Then this is a business person. What they think, how do they react? Of course, they start asking questions. That's their conclusion. Developers, releases, that's risk. Let's do, a user acceptance testing. Let's put this UAT version on a branch, in a server, in a cellar, dark and deep. Let's leave it for a year because software as wine matures. And then a very particular customer launched such a software after a year, and they, surprise, surprise, it didn't work. The thing is, however, when business gets this attitude, they want to build in stagnation. They want to build in, stops. They want to build in quiet periods. Sometimes you hear about release trains. Sometimes you hear about RCs, about betas, about golds, about code freezes, stabilizations, sanitization branches. There are different names for that. The thing is, usually that's a sign of no trust. Of course, if you're doing if you're a gaming industry, and if you want to burn something physically on a DVD and then ship it to customers, then doing RCs and beta, that has a different way of going forward. But for software that you could refer to as business software, doing RCs is difficult. Try to release often. Try to involve business, because that's what you do. You have to manage your stakeholders, as somebody fluent with business lingo would call it. But the thing is, small changes should happen quickly. A good selling point is to ask your business whoever, okay, this is a free line code change. How long do you think it should take? Well, it takes me 5 minutes to develop and then 7 minutes to write a test. So actually, I will spend 7 hours doing that. And then we will take 3 months to deliver, because that's how long it takes to get to production in our case. Usually, if there are ways for business to force a feature to go into production faster. If you can talk to them and try to make them think what to me seems like the normal way about features going into production faster, then try to convince them that if we have the same similar and familiar process for doing all the releases, we will be able to push out things more quickly. This way, you will not get this stagnation. You will get a process. Business will give you some trust, and you can build a pipeline. A pipeline, multiple stages. You probably all know that. You have a Jenkins job that does this and does that, and then you have another Jenkins job, and things about pipelines is they tend to go slow, because clear case works that quickly, because Subversion works that quickly, because running tests on a WebLogic runs that long, and then because your Selenium suite takes that much time. There is one solution. It's called parallelizing. The question is, which part should you parallelize? And the answer is, you can parallelize all the things. Some things give you smaller returns, some things give you bigger returns. Of course, you start with the big wins. And then, the hidden message about parallelization is, if you can make it parallel, your software will probably be better. Because if you can run multiple database builds at the same time, then there is a good probability that your database handling logic is somewhat separated from each other, or maybe you know how to deploy database changes. You might want to watch Leonid's talk about refactoring databases. He's got some really cool and nifty ideas, and there is Leonid right over there, hidden. The bad thing to do about releases is compiling things over and over again. Why is it a bad thing? Well, in a script environment, it's not really a bad thing because you cannot compile, PHPs unless you're Facebook or doing some fancy stuff with that. If you're in the Ruby world, you don't compile again. But if you're in the Java world or C++ world, especially C++, if you keep compiling and then you have a magic set of variables or compiler flags especially, you have to, treat them and nurture them and, sometimes you might find that this bit of code can only be compiled on one machine. And it's a problem because this machine doesn't scale that well because nobody knows why it is so. And if you have to compile over and over again, primarily you lose time. Especially if you use Scala and you're not new to SBT and you're not fluent with modules, you might lose 10 minutes instead of 1. If you have done any serious C++, by serious I mean serious that it compiles for 6 hours or more, you know the pains. It's a lot of time that is just lost and it doesn't serve any ideas. Of course, if you're compiling with debug versus no debug, that is probably, it depends on your business, but probably you could compile one version once again, and then go forward with those builds. Using SCP to deploy. Why is it a sign of failure? Because it's manual. I, as a person, don't scale that well. For anybody to get another copy of a human, it takes probably 25 years if the guy will be a bright one, and then it requires, there is a high degree of risk to make sure that it will be a geek who wants to work in technology. So 25 years to get another guy to be used to SCP, that's problematic. Another thing with human is that humans have those, religious things. They have their own, I have to, use some salt, drink a beer before I release or deploy or something, or I have to click back and forth in my SCP client because otherwise it might not work. That's not really proper. The bigger question that it raises is, how do I replicate that in production? How do I replicate production? Let's imagine that we have a perfect environment and then we get acquired by a very big company and then we want to replicate the situation in a data center in US. And, you cannot just ship developers MacBooks or MacBook Airs or whatever that is over to the US because they have to sit in Germany in a data center. So you have to script it, you have to automate that. How to do that? There are a few tools. You probably can talk to your admin staff about what's very good and your organization specific. But then let's come back to the artifacts. Compile them once, create them once, and then you can share files, share jars, share binaries. Just put them on an NFS, put them on S3, put them wherever your organization has the sacred place to store zip files with whatever extension you have to use so that you pass different checks, whether it's GIF or company name zip or something, because things do happen there. But please store them and use them and keep using them, and then if that will make things better. Another thing is, if you're releasing things with strange procedures, only with humans, you get a release team. If you get a release team, that's a very anti-team thing to have, because they are doing something that really is has to be manual, because they are probably smart people. So they care about their job security. So if it's manual and they cannot fire me, then why should I automate that? They become sacred cows. They bring in general unhappiness. You cannot complain about their work because they are doing the important stuff. They create tensions along the lines of us versus them. Sorry, I cannot help you with your bug because it's stupid because I'm going to do the important release. Go talk to my manager. He knows releases are important because, that's how you actually deliver value. So you get release processes, you get curious release processes, ones that, for example, require somebody, in the US to enter a magic number, and then somebody from Asia to verify that magic number. That happens really well. Email works perfectly, but they use phones, so it usually, they have to be able to call each other. It's funny. If you can automate things, it's always for the better. And there is a law about processes, especially release ones. It's called the Parkinson's law. If you let a release process take 2 months, it will take 2 months, just because it can. Because people are, well, generally naturally lazy, because it's, well, we all think. Which then happens, as I mentioned before, business wants to push something quickly, really quickly. You get unofficial releases. Your processes gets, well, sidestepped. You get things that end up in production, and nobody really knows how they ended up in there. You get 0-byte jars, you get classes that are duplicates, you get people to open a jar that has been pushed and then change things inside. It gets tricky. The good rule of thumb is don't do unofficial releases, have a good and easy to work with release process and just follow it, stick to it. Of course, as I mentioned, the release team, they like to sit in their bunkers. They are quite happy in there. They feel safe. What to do? Well, you have to break the different teams. You have to integrate people, because probably they are geeks. Probably you can discuss some subject, be that kids, be that games, be that, I don't know, skiing, be that paragliding. They have to have some hobbies. So from my experience, games are awesome. The situation we had was there was a team of ops guys sitting there. We were sitting here. Nobody would appear on the deadline. Nobody would cross the line, because it's them versus us. What we did in an office in Krakow, we started playing Wolfenstein, Enemy Territory, because it's a team game, and that worked really well, because when people started to scream at each other during games, "How did you shoot, you idiot?" Then, if they actually said "you idiot" to somebody during a game, that made them able to offer some criticism later during normal work. As hilarious as it might sound, it was a very big thing, because admins started to talk to developers. Developers started to talk to admins. People learned about the nicknames that they received, because of course you don't scream with their full name. Of course you scream with the nickname, and then you realize that nobody else knew, and then you realize that you were being screamed at. But it was useful. It was tremendously useful. We did that on company time, 1 round per day usually, for a few months, and then people would just talk. It was a single team. So that was a huge win. Other things you can do is, well, go paintball, go do something. Have it be a team activity, and games are easier because you just need a laptop. You can do it for 15 minutes and then you can go. Infrastructure. Well, treat infrastructure as code. That's the baseline. The approach could be, well, we use Chef, we use Puppet, we use CF Engine, whatever other infrastructure as code tool that you wish. It should be awesome. Yes, that's one thing. People are still behind the decisions. If you make a stupid code change and if you replicate it to everywhere, well, you've got 100 servers to fix. The thing is that you can actually test most of those with those tools. I prefer Chef because I find it much easier than Puppet, because of how it handles ordering and you're more allowed to code in there. You can do TDD. It's trivial. It seems trivial, but surprise, it helps. You know that it helps because you do testing. I hope you do some testing. Developers actually are light years ahead of admins in terms of doing TDD. It's really okay if an admin sits with a developer and they try to test a bit of infrastructure code. The tools are decent. The support, testing support is really decent. You can TDD a bit. You cannot fully TDD because, well, of how packages and systems work. It's not fully testable, but it's definitely in a much better shape than it was a few years ago, in which you did some bashing and then hoped that it all would work. You can do some tests and then, well, run an integration test against a really physical or a VM and then see if it seems okay. There is a static analysis tool for Chef called Food Critic. It's like JSLint, but for Chef, it's really good. Should you use Chef? Should you use Puppet? Should you use something else? Doesn't matter. Stick with one. If you have admin team already familiar, well, just use the same. If you don't like it, talk to them. Maybe they will teach you. And, well, just get on with it. But there is a different kind of creatures. Those creatures really like your network cables. Really. Especially if you live in Krakow, you probably might have heard about at least a few accidents involving, well, those machines and fiber cables, especially in the city center. Because cables are supposed to lie exactly in here, and then, of course, we dig on the other side of the street, so we will not break the cable, and we will not break the internet for everybody. So the question now becomes, how do you build your environment? Well, first of all, of course, it will be slow because it's environment. You have to download packages. So, well, the simple answer is to parallelize, make snapshots, take middle stages, have multiple stages of an infrastructure build. You probably can start from a blank Debian image, but then you can patch it all the way up and then have it as an intermediary stage and then put some of your favorite packages and then save the snapshot and then have two parallel stages. You should upgrade your runtime, but, well, it can happen like that. It can also happen like that. Well, Ruby is particularly famous, or was particularly famous around February, March this year, and probably January as well, where they released a security release every week, I think. You can use RVM, but RVM has a problem that looks like that. GitHub sometimes doesn't work. But don't think that I hate Ruby because, well, that's Java. Some of the updates. The ones in marked red are the ones that contain security fixes. And the ones that are not marked red, well, there is only 3 of them. But if coming back to the internet, do you really need your internet to build? Well, the answer is of course. We are an internet company. And, well, really? Those things go down. You probably know Nexus or Artifactory. You probably, if you have done anything with Ruby gems, you probably have worked with them, but it's actually quite a very useful experience to see, can you build without the internet? Running a local Nexus is an easy thing. Most of the companies do. You can tell your SBT to use a different repository than the one by default. You should do that. Funnier things happen with Perl, but you still can. Even funnier things happen with Ruby applications, but you still can. You don't need it to. You don't need the internet to build. Do a proxy, do a varnish, do a squid. Well, whatever, just try to build without the internet. You'll learn about the actual dependencies your software pulls in. That's a very useful experience to have. Well, another thing is that sometimes things on the internet, they can just change by themselves. If you've never noticed, well, a signature change in a jar file on certain file hosting services, well, good for you. But, well, unfortunately, these things do happen. Not often. And how can you trust that the binary that sits in the internet is the same one all the time? Well, obviously you can. So, builds running without the internet. And it has to be the application and the environment. For this very simple reason, it just saves your nerves, it just saves you sanity, it saves you a lot of time. Because pulling things out of a, well, local network is just faster. Of course, if you're on Amazon, you're probably very lucky because there are package repositories that are local to Amazon, but any of your internal company releases that happen to be deb packages or other kind of packages you can store on a local repo. Those repositories become the single source of truth. So if it's there, it's official, it's what we can release. If it's not there, sorry, we will not put a binary from my desktop or anybody else's desktops. But speaking of desktops, you probably know this thing. You probably, well, know that Firefox updates from time to time. It's not that bad anymore, but it used to be, well, what killed me when I tried to use Firefox, which also made me switch to Chrome. Firefox is updating, yes, awesome, but I would like to use it, I don't want to wait, and then you get the update of plugins, and that hurts. Desktop apps are beyond our control. You might expect, you might get very different versions of desktop apps. Build in some level of automated version check. Build an auto update. Don't make it bad for the users, because then they will try to, well, go use a different one. Mobile apps. Well, WebView is nice. It has some hidden security features, but the thing is, if you're just embedding a WebView, you actually control the application because you're giving people a web application. The thing about binary mobile application is that if you do releases too frequently, people get curious. And, well, if people are too curious or are unhappy, or if they notice that your application keeps being downloaded all the time and, well, spends half of their 3G plan, they might get rid of your application. Because on the mobile space, you have such a vast amount of applications to choose. So try to, well, change backend. Yes, you can. But changing the front, well, no, it becomes a fine line. What you can do is, well, ask if they want new features. Would you like to get a new feature? Well, please use our, well, beta channel. Please update now. There are some awesome features, especially if you promise performance. That it's usually a win. Also, if you want people to stop using a certain version, tell them that it's going to have slower performance than the current one. It doesn't. You don't need to do a thread sleep or breaks or pauses inside the code. It actually works. People like to have the faster, more shiny versions. So forcing doesn't work. Unfortunately, you cannot just force everybody to connect their laptops to the internet because they might have no internet. You know that releases give us feedback. That's one of the promises of continuous delivery. That's one of the promises of Agile, repeating and having short feedback loops. So, ops, your admins, of course, they want feedback. Deployments give you feedback. What happens? What is bad or what is, well, surprising is where there are developers doing infrastructure, especially if there is only one developer that does infrastructure, because then you cannot replace the guy because he only knows what to do. And if he gets hit by a truck, well, poor you. If your business wants to fire the guy, but then he cannot be fired, then he ends up earning $500,000 for working 2 days out of a week. And I'm talking dollars, and the guy works, could live in, let's say, Budapest. What you can do is start noting down days without accidents. And if somebody breaks the chain, nobody will want to get, the rubber chicken, the whatever token of lack of gratitude you have. It can be, you have to go out with everybody and buy them rounds. It can be something else. The thing is just to make it visible. Like, many methodologies say do information radiators. Try to make your build monitor in a prominent place. Try to do the same about your infrastructure status. If people can see, then people will care. That's really easy. That's a very simple mind trick. I've seen it. That's taken a step too far. Somebody took a screenshot of everything green and actually put it there and didn't display the real status. We noticed after a few days because the dates didn't change, but people were so ashamed that they did that. So it's a good thing, of course. It's nice if it's animated because then people will expect some animation to happen once every while. Deployments, they have to be tracked. I have seen a lot of deployments that are not tracked. So somebody releases, nobody knows why, nobody knows what's inside. That's the situation that I started with. You have to know which version you're running. You have to know which branch it came from. You have to know who did that at what time. You have to know who the application is. So it's awesome if the application can introduce itself. It's awesome if the application can say clearly what components it depends on. it's even more awesome if your application can actually work without some other components not being there. And I'm not talking about, well, working with a database, but if you're a, let's say, an e-commerce site, if one of the payment providers goes down, you shouldn't probably display a 404 into the user's face. That's not nice. They will not like it. What works if you happen to be on this well, sad side of deploying well, a whole code tree into production, and it's a scripting language, you can actually put the .git inside. If somebody has a scripting language and somebody hacks your web server, well, they will have the source code anyway. That's not a big deal. If they have the, well, all of your history, it might be a big deal. Just put in some reference which version of the source tree this is. With Git, it's easy if you actually leave the whole Git directory inside. I'm not saying that it should always be done, but it's one of the solutions. A starting point. I'm not saying that it's the good thing to go to for all the way. Put in some timestamping document, just touch a file, and it gives you some information. If you also tell which machine and what version of Java or Ruby, what libraries were available, that's even better. If you have the builds chefed and automated all the way, like Gradle, like something else, that's great. Also, try to have a failed deployment procedure. Rollback, well, if you know how to do them, it's much easier. Database migrations, well, that's a very big thing I'm not even going to cover. There was a good talk about it already. You would like to know which deploy was good. You want to have some sanity checks that run automatically after deploys. There are things like canary deploys, there are red-green or blue-green deploys. You can read about them in the continuous delivery book. The thing is, just track them, know what's happening, and have a scenario of actually, if one machine goes down, well, should we proceed? Should make it build in a decision point. Again, glue. I know that people in here like to hear about tools. That's one of the nicest tools. Do test your rollback, and well, surprising as it may seem, do test your backups. Have you ever heard of a company that did MySQL backups that contained nothing? They just ran MySQL backup and they didn't pass in any flags, or they did some improper set of flags. So what they got was an empty zip file. And well, the way people realized was that, well, unfortunately, somebody tried to use that backup. Later, what happened, their database files weren't really that corrupted, but, well, database changes. They should be easy to deploy. How? Again, talk was already here. One curious thing is that if your application has a state, if it has, well, long-running processes, long-running transactions, and long-running, I mean, sending 1 million emails is probably a long-running transaction because you cannot do it in a minute. It will take a few hours. There are papers about it from the 1970s, things like sagas. You can give them a look. Well, environments, your application should be aware of the environment. It's not a bad thing if the application has a notion of a production mode. It's not a bad thing if it has a notion of a well, lower grade environment. The bad thing is if you actually start hard coding addresses. They should be separate from everything. Love your partial failures. There is a very simple thing that you can do. If you have a multi-component application, run each component from a console, press Ctrl-Z on the Linux to one of the processes and try to see if you can actually use the other parts. That's a very simple test. Many programs just fail that. Also, try to build in switches so that you can, well, disable using a third-party provider, disable using a certain data warehouse, make a decision tree, build that logic into your software. That's actually okay. Have an admin panel, have it automated, have it scriptable. Just be able to make informed decisions about how your software runs. Devens. So development environments, develop your own machines. How long does it take a new guy in your company to make a first commit? What did you say? 1 day. 1 day is quite awesome from what I've seen. week. Well, week. So I can join your company, go for a holiday, and start a week later, and then I can probably. Awesome. Well, you know how much sense it makes. Try to automate it. If you want to learn Chef, you can start automating developers' machines. Of course, they are supposed to be breaking. They are expected to be breaking, and they do break because developers love experimenting. Don't do sacred VMs, but use VMs that are disposable and reusable and automatable. There is a good tool called Vagrant. Have you heard of Vagrant? That's an awesome tool to try out. Automate your development environments. Those are some of the tools that you can check out. Pick any of them. Try to play with one of them. If you don't like this one, ask your friends what do they like. Try it. It's really awesome. And well, because it's going to be lunchtime and you probably will be hungry and want to grab the plate before the others do, well, I'll get to the point. So, well, guys, just, well, release, even if it's the Kraken. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we still got like 2 more minutes. So, do you have any questions? No. Okay, so I would like to invite everyone for lunch break. Thank you.